Hello everyone, I'm Jakob Andersen from Copenhagen, and we previously in 2019, as some of you might remember, we did the State of Running, and this year together with World Athletics we did the State of Trail Running, let's dive into it. It's me you see on the left there, and probably also in the top right corner. I'm the founder of RunRepeat, and I've done this study together with Ivanka, who holds a PhD in mathematical analysis. However, I will say this report is more a report of descriptive statistics, so it's not any advanced math models or anything. For Ivanka, this is a walkover, a very simple task. It's just to say, don't expect something super advanced. It's descriptive statistics. So first, briefly about what we do at RunRepeat. So our main focus is actually lab testing shoes. We call it lab testing. Maybe it's more like garage testing. Some of you have probably visited brands and seen their laboratories, and I've visited many of them, and my big dream is to make the biggest laboratory where we test running shoes in the world. But we do all sorts of tests, and as you can see in the top left corner here, we cut the shoes in half and measure all sorts of things about these shoes. We measure how the midsoles behave when temperatures change. For example, a lot of people, they would go buy a soft running shoe, but then when they are on the road and it's winter and they live in an area where it's cold in winter, the properties of the shoes change dramatically. Or we have a smoke test where we test for breathability, and we test cushioning and lots of other things. That's what we primarily do. However, we also have a huge passion for data and numbers, with myself as a background in statistics. So that's why we've done these previously and why we love to do these data studies. So about the report here, 6 months, the biggest part of the job to create such a report is also the most boring part, and that is to collect all data. Because as you can imagine, if you need data from many different sources, all data will be presented in different ways, and you need to match, and it's a lot of it also just going through spreadsheets and finding those errors to unify all of the data. And 6 months just to collect and clean the data. After that, doing the report is maybe a month of data analysis, trying to find interesting things. So we have 117,000 events included from 1984 to 2022. And we have some limitations in our study. As you can see, we have like 90+% of race results in America and Western Europe, but we say 90+%, we don't know the exact other 10%. We've run some tests to see, do we have this, do we have that, and done that quite extensively, but you never know exactly if the last 10% is the unknown. However, our limitation is very much in Asia, Africa, and South America, where we don't have robust enough data to be able to show something cool about how much we're covering of that market. We have made a lot of exclusions, because when you go through a data set, you need to make sure it's clean and it's not too biased. And one that I quickly want to address is, for example, we're excluding races that indicate that they are walks or run for charity. You might say run for charity, it's still a run, but the how can I say, the way that run is done is very different compared to a normal trail race. That's why we've said we'd rather have a little bit less data and then have it be more accurate over the years. We also include obstacle course races and such. And it's important to note that in the beginning, in the first years, numbers will be underrepresented because not all data sources would be available, and sometimes we had to go back and forth and a lot of emails to get such data, and that has been challenging. And let's get into it. Growth in trail running. The I'll start out with this chart, which I found quite interesting. I think I think a lot of people who work in road running, they see trail running as, yeah, it's the hippies who like to go into the forest. But I will remind you that there are, for every one trail runner, there are only 5 road runners almost. So the trail running market is very significant. But I think one major difference that sometimes can make trail running overlooked is twofold. By the way, remember, this presentation is about finishers, so people who finish a race. It's not people who just go into the mountains or the forest to run. But one major difference is, if you look at the marathons, what are the 10 biggest marathons? Where are they located? They are located in the biggest cities of the world. Often it's capitals, but otherwise it's big and famous cities. So a lot of what drives, I'm not saying this is not to discredit anyone who's here, for example, and represents Boston Marathon, which is an amazing marathon, but it's to say you have a big city to put your name next to, and people would love to go to Boston, would love to go to New York or Barcelona or Bangkok. And in trail running, the biggest place is Chamonix, a place where the population is only 10,000 people. And while it has a big reputation within the outdoors, it's not nearly as big a reputation for the city. So it means that what we see is that the races in trail running, they are a lot less well known. And they are very small. On average, there are 91% fewer participants in a trail race than there are in a road race. But let's have a look at the growth. There are a few stories in this chart, as you can probably already see, and most of you will most likely first get to the huge decline that we've seen during the pandemics, or yeah. The first story for me is the growth the last 10 years, and 231% is just massive. And compared to road running, it's really, if we go back to the slide of how big trail running is compared to road running, the light green share will only increase from here. And the first story is obviously the COVID, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But obviously, it's no surprise to see that the participation went that far down. You might be surprised it didn't go further down, but we actually see, like in April 2020, it was down by 97% compared to the year before. So this chart, remember, COVID ran from let's say February, March, and then for the rest of the year. And there were some periods where some things were open and some races were still going on. So that's the explanation for this. Another story here is that there's been a very, very strong bounce back. However, we are not back to the peak of 2019. And you did see a massive spike in 2019. When we are looking at this, I'll go to the next slide, because here the lines might be a little bit small here, the explainers, but I'll speak of like the line you see in the top. That's participation in trail running month by month in 2019. So that's before we had COVID. And the bottom line is the year of COVID, 2020, the first year. And then I included 2022. But only for the first 3 months where we have the most significant data. Because sometimes what we see when we collect this data is that the most recent data sometimes gets updated. I was participating in a trail race 2 weeks ago, and my race results are not yet up. And so we just want to make sure that we're not underrepresenting trail running in the most recent months. We could have included April, May, and what I see preliminary is that it's about minus 15%. We try to run different reports on where would we be by the end of the year, and the base case, the most likely case is that we would be around minus 15% compared to 2019. Another interesting thing here, if you are in road running, you know that there is a natural seasonality in road running. And that's in the spring and in the autumn. If you look at this chart, you so clearly see and this is not just an outlier for 2019, you see it in 2018, 17, 16, September and October, that's trail season. And you might wonder, so in road running, we have big marathons in the spring and in the autumn as well. But how come autumn is so big? I don't know. One hypothesis, and that is mostly based on personal experience, I would say, is that many of the races are held in mountain areas. And if you've been skiing, you might have been skiing in March and sometimes even April. And it means that the races, they are uncertain about the likelihood of their event taking place if it happens in the spring. And therefore, the following is probably bigger in the autumn, where there's no snow and the conditions are more stable. That's my hypothesis, but maybe the bright audience here would have better ideas as to why this is. I included this chart, which shows the participants by month, and it's similar to the other one. It goes from 2018 until April 2022, and other than again clearly showing the trend of September, October in 2018, 2019, and 2021. However, it's 2021. I am a little unsure if everything was over with COVID in all places, so I'm a little reluctant to say that one clearly also shows the seasonality, but there's an indication that it definitely does. What's interesting here is to see the effect of the waves, right? You see in the middle of the chart, that's where we were hit the first time, and then again in the winter, we actually started to get up to quite a good October. Not good, but there were people who did a race, and then it scaled all the way back, almost down to zero again. This is another area where trail running is different from road running. And not to say the 5K is also by far the most popular distance in road running. But the difference, if you look at this chart, there are two things that this is, by the way, most popular distances for trail running, is if you look at the last 3 bar charts. So the 50K is more popular than the marathon. And that's a mindset that people who come from road to trail would need to adjust to if they are organizing races. That it is, the 50K is the new marathon in trail running, at least. And it's not to say that the marathon doesn't exist, because you clearly see it in the chart. It's maybe 2/3 the size of the 50K. The second interesting find is, and you might have experienced this yourself if you've done a lot of trail running, is that many distances are not 5K, 10K, half marathon, and marathon. They are other distances. It's 6.3 kilometers. It's 7 miles. It's all over the place. And that's because in road running, whenever you have a course which you think is good for your race, but it's 100 meters too long, then you just make the turn 50 meters shorter, so that you would, when you go back, it's 2 times 50, so it's 100 meters shorter. In trail running, you might have specific points in nature that you need to reach, which makes it difficult to reach exactly the 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon. What is also added to this is that what we found is, in trail running, more than in road running, when races are said to be 5K, they are a lot less accurate about it being 5K. There's just something good to know about it. This chart shows you what percentage of races in a given year that had fewer than 500 participants. So the overall trend, it's a declining trend, but it simply means that races are getting bigger. In 2010, 72% of races had fewer than 500 participants. And today we are at, I think, 13%. So small races, it's not to say that small races are dying, but it's to say that the bigger races, they are more dominant now. And you do see some trends, like anecdotal trends in this, where there's some consolidation and there's bigger promotion about some bigger trail races, I would say. But as I said in the beginning, 91% fewer participants per race in trail running than in road running. So this effect would eventually have to come. But you don't see trail races. I can't remember how many participates in Chamonix, but it's no, like the big marathons, it's 50,000, and there are quite a few of them. That doesn't happen here. They have some limitations in terms of how many can go on the trail. I included a chart about ultra running specifically, and first thing to note is that this data goes to 2018 only, so actually pre-COVID levels. And trail running was growing 231%, and trail running, ultra running is almost at a pace that's twice as fast. So people who do go into trail running definitely do enjoy the longer distances, and we see that the average finisher in a trail race runs almost 2.5 times as far. So that means that the 5K runner now runs 12.5 kilometers on average. Next topic is demographics and finish times. This chart is actually from the state of running, but it tells a story about trail running, which I find very interesting, so that's why I've included it. It shows the pace of runners on the marathon, the half marathon, the 10K, and the 5K. And the general trend, while there are ups and downs, is that you would say runners are getting slower. It's not the individual runner who is getting slower. It's the average runner who participates in a race. And we previously run this story that runners are getting slower. The real story in that story is simply that the sport is attracting more people who don't run as fast as the average was before, which drags down the average. But this is not a good or bad thing. It just is. What's interesting here is, though, if you compare this to trail running, and I think there has been and will be more thoughts on that, is the motives of trail running. And it's something to keep in mind that when people participate in a trail race, they might not have the same motivations. A little bit more about that. Pace by age. I know there are some current or previous competitive runners here, and they would look at the chart on the left here and say, well, why aren't the 30 to 39-year-olds the fastest? We know that they are the fastest. And there's some things I just can't explain when you gather data, because in road running, you would see the age group 20 to 29, so the first bar chart would actually be slower than the second bar chart. But for some reason, in trail running, that's not the case. And otherwise, the graph explains itself pretty well. The older, the slower, which would be pretty much expected. What we do see is on the right side here, you see, it's a little complicated, this chart, so I'll explain it a little bit. I did the pace only for males. You always need to just do for one gender, because if you mix them, then if you compare data to 20 years ago to today, 20 years ago there might be female participation of 25%, and now it's 45%. So it's good to do one gender at a time to keep data clean. But what's interesting is that you would expect, you as an individual, if you run a 5 kilometer or a 10 kilometer, I mean, my average pace in a 10 kilometer is slower than that in the 5K. And if you look in the chart, you see the 5K is the yellow one and the 10K is the green one. What you see is across age groups, people run at a faster pace when they run a 10K. And that is again to support this idea that it's simply different people who run different distances. So it's more competitive, or it's people who are in better shape who run a 10K, and they are significantly better in shape. And this also goes for the half marathon. However, when you get to the marathon, you see that now people are getting slow. And that might be this thing with the marathon being the most significant race in road running. This chart is for road running, by the way. And therefore, there's a lot of, let's say, personal achievement or prestige in achieving the marathon. And therefore, a lot of people would have that as their first long race they would even participate in. age distribution, made a fun headline: old men and young women. You see the red bars are females, and the dark green one is males. And what you basically see is that there's a small, it's slightly skewed towards women being younger in running and men being older. However, I am unsure how you'll actually use this for anything, because while there is a difference, the most outspoken difference is probably 60 to 69-year-old, where you have more males than females, like proportionally, but the distribution is the same. I mean, they both peak at around 30 to 50 years. So, yeah. And then a little troublesome slide from me, which maybe someone in the audience could explain to me at some point. Very often when you run some data, you have an idea what the data is going to look like. And in this case, it's complete opposite of what I expected. And I simply can't explain it. So the light green bar chart shows the 50 kilometers distance, and the dark green one shows the 5K. So a 10x difference in the distance. And what you see is that for the 50 kilometer, the older people get, the slower they get. But not here for the 5K. And that I just cannot explain. And this sometimes happens, and there's always a reason for it. But I just haven't been able to in this one. I will say, remember, I scaled the chart here on the left so that so that actually is. Small differences between men and women we saw on the age. We also have here on the preferred distances. You clearly see that there are 3 lines in the top and 2 lines at the bottom. Isn't it interesting that women, on the left you see the percentage of women in the race. On distances 5K, 10K, half marathon, in trail running, it's 50-50 between men and women. 50-50. Then you jump to the marathon and the 50K, and suddenly you see it drop to around 30%. 1/3 women, 2/3 men. Yeah, it's interesting. Here, just a funny chart to show the differences in culture of who is attracted to running and trail running. And this chart shows what countries have the highest representation of females and which ones have the lowest. And Canada, Argentina, and New Zealand have more female runners than males, and whereas Morocco, Japan, India, and Portugal have only around 20% women. I can't really say what is good or bad. It's just those are the numbers. This one, let's start from the right. If I am to run a 100-meter sprint against my wife, I would expect that I would finish before her. She's not here, but she's actually a former 100-meter runner, so I might offend her now, but that's what I expect. But and you see that generally speaking, men run faster than women, and at the 5K distance, men are on average 18% faster than women. But see what happens as the distance gets longer. On the marathon, it's only 11% difference. At the 50 miles, it's only 3.7%. At the 100-mile difference, there's basically no difference in the finish time of men and women. And of course, we had to look at what point are women then actually faster than men. And if you include races, there are not many of them. But if you include races longer than 195 miles, 300 kilometers, women are on average 0.6% faster than men. This is the funny story, but the interesting part is that the longer the distance, the smaller the difference between the two genders. And I'm sure everyone here in the audience has their own hypothesis as to why that is. So I'm not sure I need to come with my ideas as to why it is. There can be physiological ones, there can be psychological ones, there can be many reasons, and some of them will be overlapping and some of them will have contradicting effects. motives for running. This is very short and the last part of the presentation. And what I think is very important in trail running is the motivations are different. Whereas in road running, a lot would do it for the achievement motives, for the competition, or for their own personal goals. But the motivations to trail running, I'll not address too much about it because there has been and will be more about that. But they are wildly different, and it's a lot more about your own well-being and the social elements and being part of nature. That was it from me for today, the State of Trail Running 2022. And the link that I'm actually sharing here is then the link to the State of Running, the old one. It should be runrepeat.com/state of trail running. That was it from me for today. Thank you.